Welcome to the Motivitystate Podcast, the space where we dive into mobility, movement, biomechanics, neurology, and much, much more. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Motivitystate Podcast. Today on the show, we have my good friend and colleague, Lucas Hardie, also known as Range of Strength. Welcome, and it's great to have you, Lucas.
Thanks for having me, Rado. Really looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
As usual, I'm going to start sharing a personal story of how I met Lucas, how I know him, and what my personal experience is with him. And then we'll get going with questions, and hopefully we'll be able to add value. This time, compared to the last episodes, it's going to be mostly like practical stuff because Lucas is also a practitioner, just like myself. So it's not going to be so much principles, but a lot of practical stuff that you can start applying. So as my memory goes, Lucas and I we met in Denver in 2016 at a seminar of gymnastic bodies. And it was super cool because he was one of my friends on Instagram that we just connected, and we've like exchanged messages here and there, followed each other around, but we never met. And then it came naturally. And a funny story, he had issues with his accommodation, so he slept at my place, so we were able to further connect apart from just training and going to the workshop. And ever since, we've been keeping in touch and following each other's growth and supporting each other in different ways. So I will not tell his stories. I'll let him do that. So Lucas, who are you and what's your story?
Yeah, my name's Lucas Aaron, like you've said, and I am a coach. My journey started in the direction as strength coach. I still consider myself a strength coach, but everything really flipped and switched on me when I suffered a bicep injury. I started working towards improving my movement capacities, what I was able to do. I had gotten myself to a point where I was primarily focused on the big lifts, training for pure strength, and had found myself in a situation where that wasn't really making me better at life. And I started researching different ways to improve my movement. And it really came down to improving my flexibility first. I didn't have the foundation of flexibility required to do a lot of the cool things that I wanted to do, which led me down to, the gymnastic bodies route where you and I met. And that story of meeting you, I think there has to be a little bit more around that, because that was like, it was the craziest thing. I had gotten sent to Denver. I wanted to do that seminar, and I was working for the military at the time. So they arranged my accommodations, and they had given me some money in advance in case of an emergency. And I got there, and they wouldn't accept my accommodations card. It was a natal day weekend, so there's no way I was getting accommodations anywhere else. And you and I had talked a little bit back and forth. Like we had just started. I remember you saying, let's grab a coffee when you get there. So I got on the Union Station train, and I just decided to go to Awaken. I was like, I'll just go to Awaken and figure it out. I don't know where I'm staying or what I'm doing. I was thinking about staying outside, like sleeping outside the gym. I was like, whatever I have to do. I got all the way here. And then we met. It's so funny, like the connections you make on social media, but we started messaging each other on Instagram, and we met up for a coffee, and we were talking about, like, I was explaining to you what's going on, and you were like, well, I think there's a couch or something, like in the Airbnb I'm at, and you were right across from the gym. And it was like, wow, like it all worked out. And it was fun, man. We hung out the whole time. Like I remember we were doing press handstands that night in the Airbnb after we done the gymnastic bodies class.
Yeah,
we were just like so into it. It was a very cool time to be in that community and that scene, because we were all like coaches with a lot of experience, but not in that gymnastics side of training. So we were all like, trying to make connections to um, using that in our traditional practices and stuff. So it's cool to think back to those times doing and troubleshooting those things, because I use gymnastics training in how I coach people now, but like with barbell and flexibility and all these different things. So it's cool to think back to like when we were exploring that stuff and trying to troubleshoot how to fit it into different practices, and that was a fun time. But yeah, a little bit about me and our backstory of meeting. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I remember back then that you were very cautious about specific movements with gymnastics, especially rings, because of all the injuries that you've suffered. And then you were looking for ways to heal yourself, and that has turned out well and served you well up to one point. But I want to also stick around to the beginning a little more, because just like myself, when I remember following your stuff on Instagram in the beginning, apart from like training at your military gym where you were coaching and working, you were also doing a lot of like floor work at home,
Hmm.
and like experimenting with things yourself, and doing all the hard stuff, because the floor, as I say, is an equalizer,
Hmm.
because it shows you where you're weak, pretty much. So
Hmm.
just like myself, I remember you exploring all the floor movements and doing things down there, and I think it's often missed piece of the whole puzzle, because, as you said, you wanted to do the cool things, but you're lacking certain flexibility attributes or prerequisites in terms of mobility.
Yeah,
So I think it's important to stress that also.
for sure. Yeah. And like for me, it started with getting that flexibility. So like really devoting some time into developing some nice ranges that I can use. And then it was about like figuring out how to use them. So like the gymnastic strength stuff was one component of it. Like how can I use, you know, this flexibility to better translate to my own body weight strength. And then it was more like the movement culture stuff, like just locomotions and floor work and exploring space, um, different things like that. And I think that's a place where we want to be in, is constantly exploring new ways that we can move and challenge the space that we have created. So that's more, I think, of what flexibility has come around to being for me, is a matter of like develop the range and then strengthen it through different challenging movements and disciplines. And I think we learn to grow more in that space.
Yeah, and my next question is actually related to what you just said, because once you shifted because you were professional, you were competing professionally in powerlifting
Mm-hmm.
competitions, and so you were already very strong in certain movements and certain like lifts,
Three movements.
but three movements. But still, you had like the general strength.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, people will consider themselves strong if they're able to do, let's say, those three movements or a couple more, like the
Yeah.
overhead presses and stuff like that. But I keep explaining that there's more to that, and there is more you should be able and you should be capable of doing in order to live a healthier life and life
Mm-hmm.
without pain. And at first, you were dealing with the pain, improving your mobility and flexibility, but in the last year or a couple of years, you've gone back to once again lifting weights, and then coaching people with lifting weights and those compound movements.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to also get to the point that people should not limit themselves, but we should also prioritize for a certain amount of time, and then uh, improve some certain skill or movement, and then move on or move back to check how things are going with whatever we were doing before. Because oftentimes you'll see that, for myself and other clients of mine, and probably yourself, you see that you have improved in your squats, for example, or deadlifts, or something else.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
tell me more about what is your approach about when we go about mobility and lifting, mixing things together, uh, dogma and confined thinking, because I mean, as you said, you don't want to limit your thinking.
Yeah, like it comes coming back to the barbell now. And there was a time there where I didn't think I would. I was like, I really enjoy having this flexibility. It's like you get something and you don't want to affect it. And I think a lot of us deal with that. Like I know as a lifter, I dealt with that too. Like I didn't want to do anything outside of that to affect gains or whatever, like that thought process. And then it was more about like, well, what can I do with this now? You get into the strength work and the body weight stuff. And then it was like starting to come back to the barbell, starts to feel really nice. And you realize like, okay, this is different. This is what I was looking for before I had a setback. And I think that is part of it, is realizing that you do have to take some time to establish those prerequisites. And some of the people that I have actually helped the most in the last 5 years have basically had a major setback. And they were like, okay, now I really have to find a way to come back. So hopefully it doesn't come to that point. But unfortunately, I think like for myself and for a lot of the people that do come to me to look for like some kind of major change in their movement and flexibility, it's when we have a major setback and we realize we have to go back and deal with those prerequisite strengths and flexibilities that we didn't take care of prior to. So, I think if we aren't doing that, and I think that most of us end up dealing with that constant stagnation of training where we like get ourselves to a certain point and we end up coming back full circle because we maybe get injured or maybe we just are limited by our current ceiling of movement. So we just have to come back and start over. And like a lot of the people I talk to, that's their training is just this cyclical. I start here, I get to this point, and then I can't progress. So I end up coming back to the start, and they just like keep, and then kind of give up a little bit at some point, or you start something new because you're not learning how to overcome those deficits. So I think, yeah, for me, the big message for flexibility is that there's not going to be a simple solution to improving your movement capacities until you actually step away and realize you can come back. I think that's the message I try to deliver now is that you can come back to the glory of the things that you think you need to do. Like if it is squatting heavy or that high performance style of strength training, it's like it'll always be there in some way, shape, or form. But if you take the time to develop that prerequisite flexibility and foundation, it'll be much easier for you to not be in stagnation and not have to feel like you're constantly resetting your training or that kind of approach.
Yeah, and I want to go. I want to go two ways from what you just said. The first one is that um, it is unfortunate that, I mean, depending on how you look at it, but it's unfortunate that you suffered an injury and you had that setback. But if you only play a victim mentality, but then on the other hand, if you're smart, just like you did, and start looking for answers and start asking questions, looking for teachers and improving your craft, at one point you realize that this is actually right now as a coach, this is what connects you to all your trainees and all the people you teach, because you understand, because you've already been there. You can connect on emotional level, on physical level, so you understand. It's not like somebody who's been like perfect form, like ripped all their life, and
Yeah.
dealing with somebody who's like overweight pretty much. And on the mental and the psychological and even on the physical aspect, you don't have any relation.
Right.
So in that
Right.
regard, I think this is a strong point on your end or on any coach's end when they've gone through the process. And another thing, as you said, oftentimes I'll see people going, just like you said, going in loop and like going back to the beginning, and then they either get discouraged and start something new, and then this doesn't work out, and then it goes for diets, it goes for training plans. So because they jump from one to another, they don't give themselves time, and they don't ask the good questions, and then they don't pretty much zoom out in order to see what they're missing, so
Mm.
that they can start improving that. And I think the hardest part is being honest with yourself, because because if you consider yourself strong, if you come from like lifting, like let's say background, and like with all the other guys, especially if you've been competitive, to admit to yourself that you have some shit that's not working as it should, like yeah,
Yeah.
that's a tough one right there.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
then and then this is the first step. So yeah, I remember I remember this quote from Coach Summer, where he said, "You feel like a bug against the windshield in the beginning when you start like doing those hard things and working on your deficits." So
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely awesome, man. And cool. In regards to, because you're a coach, but as I tell people, I believe every coach should have coach.
Yeah.
Uh, because we never push ourselves the way a coach would push us, and then there's always a different perspective, because when you're in your head it's totally different.
Yeah.
So who do you learn from, and who are your mentors and your teachers?
I've had a variety, and I mean, I still really respect the ones that I had at the start when I was powerlifting competitively. Like, you think back to those mentors that were able to help you troubleshoot situations or help you deal with like mental barriers, and those are powerful tools that you carry with you along the way. Because even now, as someone who coaches more in flexibility, it is a lot about the mental process. Coaching and kind of counseling an individual is trying to get them through that. Like, not to say like, oh, just do this program and you'll be over it. It's like, okay, we have to learn how to communicate better with these people who are trying to learn how to stretch or improve flexibility. And that's a big part of it, is having someone who can actually, so even my lessons, in the early days from some of my powerlifting coaches, I still carry with me, and how they were able to deal with me, and the kind of the mannerisms and approaches they had to those kind of situations. So back then, Tom Nichols and Darren Weatherby were big mentors of mine that had a big impact on my journey when I was getting to a higher level of powerlifting. And I think also, is with the fact that they had the experience. Like, they were at high level competition, they were on a world stage. They've dealt with like a lot of the situations you were looking to get yourself into, and that plays a lot of value in like what you're looking for as a coach, is like, has this person been there? Have they experienced this? And what from those experiences can I learn from that? So I'm always looking for mentors and coaches like that. Kit Laughlin's work is amazing, but his story is even more amazing. Like a track runner with no flexibility, got himself to a point where he's like, a world leader in flexibility. Like, it's a story you want to follow, and a individual that you want to learn from. Emmett Lewis, Emmett's approach in bringing like the circus. Like, for me, that was part of the journey too, is like I started going to these local circus schools because people were crazy flexible and doing body weight training here, but you don't really understand those practices. And I think a lot of the circus schools don't share it or know necessarily how to share it with the general population. And that's where Emmett is able to do that very well. He can take some of these practices that come from those schools of thought, and he can present it in such a way that you can relate to it, and it's more practical, and you can kind of bring it into practical settings, that's a powerful tool as well, as a mentor, someone to look up to, is like, how can you actually present something and tailor it to the audience? There's not many that can do that. Like you've said, you've had a lot of guests come into your gym. And I've been in those workshops before sometimes, where you get someone who's just like a badass kettlebell instructor, and they're really good with a kettlebell, but they can't actually like tailor what they're trying to say to the audience. So you don't really,
Yep.
like, it's a cool experience, but you don't learn as much. And I think, the mentors that you should seek out are those that can do that. They can communicate messages in a way where you can relate it to multiple environments and settings. I've spent the last couple of years getting more into martial arts, so I've had some interesting coaches and mentors that way. Kareen Balgri, he's in India. I spent some time mentoring with him this year, and he has that component in his mentoring and coaching, is like he's been in these crazy environments and he has this crazy backstory and all the things that he's done. But when you coach and train with him, he knows how to talk to you and like with where you're at and what you should work on. So that's been really nice. And James Fuller, he's had a big impact on me this year with the old time strongman training. And we've done some sessions and talked for hours about this stuff. And it's the same thing. He can bring those concepts to the real world application. So yeah, those are some people that have had really big impact on me. And I think more so taking with what they know and presenting it and providing that like kind of real world application for, you know, anyone, which I think is a very powerful tool as a coach.
Yep, definitely understand what you mean, because all the mentors I seek and I look up to are the ones who take relatively deep concept or ideas or subject, and then they simplify it and are able to teach it in a way so it's understandable to even the very beginner, and also to the more advanced trainee or trainer or practitioner. And a funny story when you mentioned, I remember about when you mentioned about martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my I wouldn't call dreams, but let's say goals. I don't know with the situation nowadays, but we talked with Jeff, the flexible Jeffrey Wolf, about going to going to Shaolin with our kids and having
Yeah.
this cool experience for a month. Um, so it's one of my goals to like spend time in such an environment, because I
Mm-hmm.
I, I remember probably on a subconscious level one of the reasons why I got into mobility and flexibility, and I do enjoy it nowadays, is because when I was a kid I was watching a lot of kung fu movies, all like Jackie Chan and all the like Shaolin and all
Yeah.
those, and then I keep joking with my clients that I need to train more for Shaolin, because when I go there, I'll probably be the least flexible guy over there.
Yeah.
So I'll be the stick man.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be an awesome
it's
experience.
it's crazy. But another thing when you mentioned Emmett is that I when I talked to him when he was teaching at my gym, 2019 for that workshop, we had this talk, and he's also gotten into like martial arts, and also he gets the concepts from martial arts. But again, it's an old archaic like concept or teaching. But then he's able to present it in a contemporary way, so
Mm-hmm.
that people can apply it right away.
Yeah.
So again, another way of simplification.
Yeah.
And this brings me to the next question. Actually, what you said about learning and applying in your daily life and activities. I'm also a big believer that you shouldn't train mobility for the sake of mobility, because there's nowadays you probably noticed there's like a huge competition on social media to come
Yeah.
up with a fancier trick or to out fancy the competition with this
Yeah, for
move
sure.
or going to deep ranges. And I keep telling people that most of the people nowadays don't need that in order to live a healthy, like good life and do the activities they want to do.
Yeah.
So one thing that I wanted to discuss is like this mobility for real life. And what is your take on that? And how do you approach and how do you program in that regard? Because all of the stuff are really dense, like compacted in a way which is both useful, you get strong, you get mobile, but there's no like fancy things pretty much from
Yeah.
from what I see.
Yeah, I think it depends on the client too, I guess. Like if you are working with athletes, you have to be specific to just developing a certain type of strength and ensuring that sport takes precedence over training. Um, and that's kind of funny discussion too, because there's probably most athletes are probably overtraining all the time for what they need, the type of strength they need
Mm,
to be strong in their sport. But I think when it does come down to like gen pop kind of approach to fitness, there has to be more research and more play. And we have to get better at teaching what that should look like and what that is, whether it's like, creating a task for someone to learn how to actually showcase their movement and what they're capable of doing, there has to be some kind of application to the mobility. And you're absolutely right in saying like there's a bit of a mobility junkie kind of culture being created where people are sitting on the floor for 2 hours moving around and controlling their bodies, but then they can't squat a barbell. And it's like, well, if you have that much control sitting on the floor, you should be able to squat a barbell or,
Yeah.
just be able to have some diversification to it. I mean, you don't want to necessarily just become good at sitting and moving around on the floor. You want to be able to apply it to, I think, the real life application is like being able to apply it to scenarios where it might be unexpected. That's some kind of scenario that you can learn to create for an individual with research and play. Um, so in my programming, I try to create that, like, as someone is looking to improve flexibility, there's got to be some kind of formatted approach to it, but there also has to be an introduction to, okay, here's a couple of drills I want you to experiment and research your movement in. And it's kind of more open concept approach to exercise than it is like, because then the questions come in like, well, how many sets and how many reps and how much? And I'm like, I just set the clock for 2 minutes and just wait, just play. So I think, that's an important component to teaching people how to use their movement. And, getting back into the barbell for me has kind of been that. And I think that there's a message we could deliver there with getting people back onto barbells, because why not? Like, now the mobility craze is up to this point where, everyone's getting super mobile, and it's like, well, you shouldn't be afraid to squat a barbell then. Because there was this almost like this fear into, well, if you can't squat perfectly or whatever, or, squatting's not safe, but yet you have everyone doing super heavy deficit Jefferson curls now.
Yeah.
Which is fine, but as long as it's, for the right application and the right reason. But yeah, I think finding ways to build those prerequisite strengths and then showing people how to use it is definitely something we should be trying to do a better job at. And that's probably some ways I would look at it doing it, or that I've been doing it. So
Yeah, I have two comments on what you said. The first one is about exploration, and then um, having the confidence of programming exploration and like free play in a trainees uh, program,
mm-hmm.
because that should come probably with your own personal confidence and knowing that things work, and being there and exploring yourself. Because nowadays, like, people are first of all, rush things, and they wanna achieve the splits or the handstand or whatever in like a record time, and they ask the question, how long will it take me, or how long did it take you? Like,
Mm-hmm.
always my answer is like, I don't know, it depends on
Mm-hmm.
on many things. And then, but Emmett also sets the right mindset in that regard. He says, like, allow yourself 18 months of like
Mm-hmm.
doing the work, and then you'll probably be able to progress to a decent level
Mm-hmm.
with the right guidance, of course. I mean, because sometimes exploration is not enough. You need to have a container,
Oh, for
like,
sure.
still explore within certain like limits, so that it doesn't get too chaotic, and then
Yeah.
your tissues and your body is able to adapt. But as you said, like, oftentimes people will say, the yoga community or the body weight community, they're like, no, I don't want to lift weights because this makes you stiff. And then the other side is like, yeah, I don't want to stretch because it will hinder my performance with the
Mm-hmm.
lifts and all that stuff. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work this way. As long
No.
as you achieve the range of movement and the range of motion,
Yeah.
then it only takes so much time to maintain it. I mean, the harder part is actually achieving the ranges. Then it's easy. You just have to spend a few seconds daily in the position, and then you own it. Your nervous
Yeah.
system knows that you're fine there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Yeah. Cool. What will be your recipe for? I know it's a like a there won't be any specific answers, and I'm not looking for that. But generally, what's your recipe for improving performance, both with mobility and strength? Like if you have to do your own mix of doing both, I mean, what would be your advice?
I think movement wise, there's like basics that we should ensure we're working towards. Maybe not necessarily ensure that they're there to a certain extent, but there should be some kind of basic outline of movement capacities. We used to do that in the military too. Like if someone wanted to get into special forces, it's like we should be able to hang onto a bar suspended for a minute, like to be able to start thinking about going into these camps of the training. So I do like having some kind of baseline targets for people to know, like, okay, these are some targets that if you hit, we are moving in the right direction for the things we want to do, whether it be performance. And I think these basics and baselines should be something that we hold everyone accountable to, like athletes or anyone. So basically, hanging ability. I think you should be able to passively hang onto a barbell and actively articulate your scapula in a hanging position. And I think the reason I hold that at a higher level than like pull-ups, for example, is because most people are trying to do pull-ups can't even hang onto a barbell or hang onto a
Yep.
bar. So
Yep.
it's maybe a better starting point to learn how to actually establish grip strength and hanging strength before just looking to slingshot yourself up to the top. Stances, like fundamental martial arts stances like long lunge and horse stance. Lunging itself and squatting itself kind of fall in that same category, but I think we can do a better job at like setting some basic standards for individuals to work towards strength in these stances. And if they, in my experience in training individuals, if they can get themselves to a certain degree of movement in these stances and strength and endurance, then their flexibility and capacities and performance improve quite a bit. So it's a bit of an easier approach to that. I think kneeling and sitting is something we have to pay more attention to as well. Like it's one thing to just talk about it, but I think to actually get people better at kneeling and sitting, I think with through good flexibility training is quite attainable. Because as you know, the research shows like the mortality rate in individuals that can't move from sitting to standing, like just little things like that. Like it's
Yeah,
stuff
without
that
using the arms, like only the legs. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's a simple fix. Like if we
Yep.
actually learn proper progressions and methods of flexibility training and strength training, you can get someone sitting and kneeling quite better, and that's going to improve their performance and capacities even at a high level of athletic training. um, some other ones would be like the trunk flexibility is a big one for me as well too. um, and that's learned through my own journey, like training for back bends and bridges, and then like all of a sudden realizing that the lack of flexibility I have in my trunk and abdominals affects how my pelvis rotates, and it affects my hip flexibility and my hip structure and my shoulder mobility and like all these things. So I think that's a very overlooked component is trunk flexibility, whether it be a back bridge or it be just the ability to extend your trunk, flex, side bend, laterally move. I think that's something we could do a better job at. Probably creating scenarios for people to improve those things. Those are the big ones, I would say. Like on top of like your traditional strength, capsule control at the hip and at the shoulder is important, but it's also kind of useless if you don't have passive flexibility there as well too. So that might be something that's being tackled too soon because it looks sexy. It's like seeing all this like cool capsule control stuff, but it's
Yep.
like you do need to have these passive ranges to work on that stuff too. So I think there has to be maybe a better kind of pyramid for those things.
Yeah. And my personal experience with clients is that they try doing the fancy stuff, as you say, like the capsule and the rotations and whatever, which are good
Mm.
things. But the muscle tone of most people is too high, either from overtraining and doing too much like specific training, or from daily life because like they're all stressed out. And then this is where, like, depending on me, but this comes also with the experience, knowing what the person needs, because Some people will need to really let go, slow it down a little bit, stretch it out, spend some time, and then start working on that active stuff again. Because
Mm-hmm.
if they're already like crazed out and like burned out from life and like from their hectic environment, and that you build more tension and more stress on top of that, even if it's for a good purpose,
Yeah.
it still might not lead to the best outcome. They might either get injured or they simply not progress, and
Yeah.
then you are the one to blame for not being able to realize what they need.
Yeah.
And and definitely, yeah. And like what you said about the trunk flexibility and movement is super important, because like all the people who are wondering why they're not able to do like overhead lifts or stabilize above their head, they think they're lacking like shoulder mobility, and oftentimes it would be the positioning of the trunk and the spine,
Mm-hmm.
and then the shoulders fix themselves
Mm-hmm.
easier. I wouldn't say easy, but easier than if you just train the shoulder or stretch the shoulders and all that.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. You probably could put
So
like mindfulness as a maybe another outside of just exercise in general, like actually learning to be at calm and rest and meditate. Like that's probably something most people need that are carrying a lot of tension and stress, is like if you introduce them to these methods of maybe passive stretching or things like that, that they can actually start to learn to be more mindful in their ability to move. That's maybe even a starting point for a lot of people too, is not always rushing to do the next great big thing, but actually just learn to sit down and relax.
yeah, and I think people set some time frames in their heads, like it has to happen and until this point, or in their heads they compete with person next to them in the gym, which is pretty much useless, because I keep telling them like if you're in your 20s, 30s, even 40s, I mean you have so much time in front of you, like a few months more or less, it's not gonna make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the rush? I mean, spend some time understanding how your body functions. Try to connect more to the different parts. Understand. Try to feel it, because when I coach people and try to get them into a position, what I look for is the sensation and the feeling they should get in that specific position. Because otherwise, I know that I'll send them home, and then if they didn't feel it, I mean, they will be just mechanically going through the movement, and then they're not going to be progressing. So,
Yeah.
in order for the homework to work, I mean, you need to do the work or get into the right positions in the gym. And in the beginning, it's really hard. Like, it's very abstract, because I remember myself when, like, until the time I really felt an actual true thoracic extension through the spine, and not like muscle driven. I thought I had it, because even before that I had like a good back bridge and all the back bends. But
Mm-hmm.
then when I was able to get deep to the spine and actually sense it, then I'm like, this is what it feels like. So I can connect on that level, and it does take time. I
Yeah.
mean, neurologically, tissue wise. So yeah, cool, man. Good stuff. Cool. The last one I have for today. Where do people start? Practical advice, like if they had to start doing stuff right away. If you have like 3, 4, or 5 times, not things that you can suggest that they can start applying without any additional equipment or anything.
Yeah. I think probably those basics I just outlined like be a good start in general. If you can learn to hang, and like that's a practice that I don't think people take seriously enough. Like it can be on a daily basis, but you can also really have more advanced sessions of like hang strength, grip strength. Um, Maybe look into rock climbing as like an avenue of activity to look to improve those things. I think that could do a lot of practical improvements for limitations in the shoulders and things that way. I think going into the martial arts side of things and looking at some of these fundamental stances, that's another more practical way to just like have a target to work towards. I think for a lot of people, it's about finding those in between targets and flexibility from, splits or big extreme back bridges to then looking at like, okay, well, hanging and martial arts stances. are more accessible. And if you establish some strength there, it's a great kind of start. The trunk flexibility, kneeling and sitting. Like if you can't sit down on your heels and let your hips be at rest, like that's kind of like ground zero. And like, as you know too, you can change that, because like you talk to a lot of people and they're like, well, I've just never been able to sit down on my heels. It's like, okay, well, have you ever been on a protocol that is designed to help you achieve that and you can work on regularly? So, I think it is about looking at those basic movements and where you lie. And as a starting point, even if you're just tackling those things, I think you can still do a lot of the things that you still enjoy doing. But as long as you're starting to make those kind of things a priority, kind of the basics, and take them more seriously, because people just don't take that stuff seriously when you think about it. Like a palms to floor pike, learning to fold, that's a really good starting point for people, whether it be like a straddle, split pancake fold, or, just folding in general. Like actually choosing to set targets on these things. Like I'm going to get my palms to the floor on a pike or a fold. Like I'm going to actually work towards improving the shape of this. How does that have to look? What movement should I be doing and for how long? Like, I think you just need to start picking different targets besides the extreme. Everyone's always picking the extreme, and that means they always start way above beyond where they should start. So yeah, I think having those measurable, attainable targets is a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that that if you have a goal, it doesn't matter if it's like in a physical aspect or in life. I mean, you need to break it down. You need to know the smaller steps in order to achieve the goal, and then you should start looking and asking the questions. How do they find out those steps? And then it doesn't matter if you do the research yourself or if you find a coach. I mean, it's important to follow the steps. Otherwise, you get discouraged because this is the start and this is the end, and there's too big of a gap between. And then you cannot, because oftentimes with mobility training, people, let's say I'll do something on the floor, and people will be super crazed out about it, and they like it, they cheer, and how they do that. And I'm like, that's expression of mobility. This took time, and all the prerequisites that are required, I already got it. So I just decided to experiment. So pretty much, even for the pike fold, if you're trying to get your palms down to the floor, I mean, you cannot just like keep pushing. Of course you can. I mean, we've seen those videos with that dad who was like doing it for 41 days and he went all crazy when he touched the floor. Of course, that's one way to go. There's also a smarter way to go, as I like to say.
Yeah, you want to
Plus,
keep
it will teach you it will teach you more things on the way.
Yeah, and you can keep the progress. Like, I don't think that dad probably kept those gains.
Probably not. Probably
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, you want to make it last.
Cool, man. Any last thoughts? Anything that you'd like to share? I mean, I'll share all your information below in the episode notes, so people will be able to find you and ask questions if they have any. But anything that we missed or anything else that came up to mind?
I'm developing a new website and membership right now, so that's something I think people can look out for. I'm doing one-to-one style programming and coaching, but my membership will basically be more accessibility to curriculum stuff for coaches and athletes and any one individual that just wants to learn, and my programs and community and stuff like that. So that's in the works right now, and hopefully we'll be live in a couple weeks. So
awesome. Something in the works.
Yeah.
And you have an open invitation to come even with the family whenever this craziness is over. Come over, and so we can get back to training again, just like good old times.
Yeah, we'll get some squats in.
yeah. I mean, I used to enjoy squats and deadlifts. I mean, I'm not scared of it.
Yeah, that's good.
Good, man. Good. Thank you once again for taking the time to have this chat. I hope it was useful for our listeners and viewers. And yeah, until next time.
Thanks for having me, man.